The morning sun cast long shadows across the grand halls of Buckingham Palace as Queen Camilla walked briskly toward the king's private study. Her heels clicked against the marble floors, echoing through the corridors that had witnessed centuries of royal drama. She clutched a newspaper in her trembling hands, the headline bold and merciless: Royal Family Scandal. Parker Bowles under investigation. Charles sat behind his mahogany desk, his reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed state papers. The weight of the crown had aged him visibly in the months since his coronation, but this morning, his expression carried a darkness that made Camilla's heart skip a beat. "Charles," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "we need to talk about this morning's papers." The king looked up, his eyes cold and distant. "Ah, Camilla, I was wondering when you'd come to see me about this mess your family has created." Camilla's face went pale. She had hoped against hope that Charles hadn't seen the reports about her son Tom's alleged involvement in the financial scandal that was now threatening to engulf the monarchy. The newspapers had been relentless, digging into every aspect of the Parker Bowles family business dealings, uncovering questionable investments and possible money laundering connections. "It's not what it seems," she said, placing the newspaper on his desk. "Tom made some poor business decisions, yes, but he's not a criminal. The media is blowing this completely out of proportion." Charles removed his glasses and leaned back in his leather chair. For a moment, the only sound was the ticking of the antique clock on the mantelpiece. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured but firm. "Camilla, do you have any idea what this scandal is doing to the crown? To everything we've worked to rebuild since my mother's death?" She moved closer to his desk, her hands clasped together. "Of course I understand the gravity of the situation, but surely we can weather this storm together. We've faced worse. Have we?" Charles stood abruptly, walking to the tall window that overlooked the palace gardens. "The Prime Minister called this morning. The Archbishop of Canterbury has expressed his concerns. Even the Commonwealth leaders are asking questions about the integrity of the monarchy." Camilla felt the walls of the study closing in on her. She had known this day might come, had feared it since the moment Charles had proposed. Being the queen consort meant not only sharing his triumphs, but also bearing the burden of any scandal that might touch her family. "What are you saying, Charles?" He turned to face her, his expression harder than she had ever seen it. "I'm saying that drastic measures need to be taken to protect the crown. The royal family's reputation cannot be compromised by the actions of your relatives." "My relatives?" Camilla's voice rose slightly. "Charles, these are people who have been part of your life for decades. Tom, Laura, your grandchildren, they're family now." "They are your family, Camilla. Not mine. Not the crown's." The words hit her like a physical blow. She gripped the back of the chair in front of her, feeling suddenly dizzy. "You can't be serious. You can't just cast aside the people I love because of some newspaper headlines." Charles returned to his desk, pulling out a folder that had been hidden beneath the state papers. "This isn't just about newspaper headlines anymore." He opened the folder and spread several official-looking documents across the desk. "These are preliminary findings from the Serious Fraud Office investigation. Tom's company, Parker Bowles Investments, is under formal investigation for potential fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion." Camilla stared at the documents, the legal terminology swimming before her eyes. She could see Tom's name highlighted in yellow across multiple pages, alongside amounts that made her stomach turn. "Furthermore," Charles continued, his voice growing colder, "Laura's husband has been linked to several offshore accounts that appear to be connected to the same financial network. The investigation is expanding." "No," Camilla whispered, shaking her head. "This can't be happening. There must be some mistake." "There's no mistake, Camilla. The evidence is mounting daily. The palace legal team has been working around the clock to assess our exposure, and their recommendation is clear." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Complete separation. Immediate and public." Camilla's legs felt weak. She lowered herself into the chair, her mind racing through the implications of what Charles was saying. "You want me to abandon my children? My grandchildren?" "Charles, please, think about what you're asking." "I'm not asking anything," he replied firmly. "I'm informing you of a decision that has already been made. As of today, all members of the Parker Bowles family are banned from all royal residences, royal events, and any association with the crown. This includes your son Tom, your daughter Laura, their spouses, and their children." The room seemed to spin around Camilla. She gripped the arms of her chair, trying to steady herself as the full impact of Charles's words sank in. "But the children, they're innocent in all of this. How can you punish them for their parents' alleged crimes?" The crown cannot afford the luxury of sentiment, Charles said, his voice devoid of emotion. Every association the royal family has reflects on the monarchy's integrity. We cannot be seen to condone or support individuals under criminal investigation. Camilla's eyes filled with tears. And what about me? What about our marriage? Our love? For the first time since she had entered the study, Charles's expression softened slightly. You remain my wife and queen consort. Nothing changes that. But you must understand that your loyalty must be to the crown first, your family second. You're asking me to choose between my husband and my children. I'm not asking you to choose anything. I'm telling you that the choice has been made for you. The royal protection officers have their instructions. As of noon today, any member of the Parker Bowles family attempting to enter palace grounds or contact any member of the royal household will be turned away. Camilla stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. This is madness, Charles. These are human beings we're talking about, not political liabilities. In the world of monarchy, Camilla, there is no distinction between the two. She began pacing the length of the study, her mind reeling. What about public opinion? What will people think when they see a grandmother banned from seeing her own grandchildren because of her husband's paranoia? Charles's jaw tightened. Paranoia? Is that what you call protecting an institution that has survived for over 1,000 years? The monarchy is bigger than any individual, Camilla. Bigger than you, bigger than me, and certainly bigger than your family's criminal activities. Alleged criminal activities, she corrected sharply. The distinction becomes meaningless when the reputation of the crown is at stake. Camilla stopped pacing and turned to face him directly. And what about love, Charles? What about the promises we made to each other? Through good times and bad, in sickness and in health? Did those vows mean nothing to you? Charles's composure finally cracked slightly. Don't you dare question my love for you. Everything I'm doing is to protect what we've built together. If we don't act decisively now, we could lose everything. We're going to lose everything anyway, Camilla said quietly. You're asking me to live a lie, to pretend that the people who matter most to me don't exist. How can our marriage survive that kind of betrayal? It will survive because it must, Charles replied, his voice regaining its formal tone. Because the crown requires it to survive. Camilla walked to the window, looking out at the gardens where she had often played with her grandchildren during family gatherings. The memories felt like daggers in her heart. When does this banishment take effect? It already has. The Royal Protection Detail received their new instructions at 6 this morning. She whirled around to face him. You made this decision without consulting me? Your own wife. I consulted with the people whose opinions matter in these circumstances. The Prime Minister, the Archbishop, the palace advisors. This wasn't a personal decision, Camilla. It was a constitutional necessity. Constitutional necessity, she repeated bitterly. Is that what our marriage has become? A constitutional necessity. Charles stood and moved toward her, but she stepped away from him. Our marriage remains what it has always been. But you knew when you accepted my proposal that the crown would always come first. Always. Camilla felt something breaking inside her chest. I thought you meant your duty to the country, to the Commonwealth. I never imagined you meant you would sacrifice innocent people to protect your image. They're not innocent, Camilla. The evidence suggests nothing conclusive yet, she interrupted. You're destroying lives based on suspicion and fear. Charles's patience was clearly wearing thin. The decision is made, Camilla. The only question now is whether you will support it publicly or make this situation even more difficult for everyone involved. She stared at him, searching his face for any sign of the man she had fallen in love with decades ago. What exactly are you asking me to do? I'm asking you to stand by my side at the press conference this afternoon, where I will announce the Crown's position on this matter. I'm asking you to show the world that the Queen Consort supports her husband and the monarchy above all else. And if I refuse? Charles's expression grew ominous. I pray that you won't put us both in a position where we have to find out the answer to that question. Camilla felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. Everything she had thought she understood about her life, her marriage, her place in the royal hierarchy was crumbling around her. The man she had loved through decades of scandal and public scrutiny was now asking her to participate in what felt like the ultimate betrayal. I need time to think, she said finally. The press conference is at 2 o'clock. That gives you exactly 3 hours and 27 minutes to think. She moved toward the door, then paused. Charles, if you do this, if you force me to choose between my family and my crown, something between us will die that can never be resurrected. He didn't respond, simply returned to his desk and picked up his reading glasses. As Camilla reached for the door handle, his voice stopped her. The car will be waiting for you at 1:30 to take you to the press room. I trust you'll make the right decision. Camilla opened the door and stepped into the corridor, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. The marble halls that had once felt like home now seemed like a prison. She walked slowly toward her private apartments, knowing that in 3 hours, she would have to make the most difficult choice of her life. Behind her, through the closed door of the king's study, she could hear Charles on the phone with what sounded like his private secretary, discussing the final details of the press conference that would change everything. The words complete separation and protection of the crown drifted through the heavy wood, each syllable feeling like another nail in the coffin of the life she had thought they were building together. As she climbed the stairs to her rooms, Camilla realized that the fairy tale she had believed she was living had just revealed itself to be something much darker, and she wasn't sure if either she or Charles would survive what was coming next. Camilla's private apartments felt different as she entered them, as if the very air had changed in the 3 hours since she had left that morning. The familiar cream-colored walls and antique furniture that had once provided comfort now seemed to mock her with their stability. Everything looked the same, but everything had changed irrevocably. She moved to her writing desk and picked up her phone with trembling hands. Tom's number was at the top of her recent calls list. She hesitated for a moment, knowing that this conversation would be one of the most difficult of her life. "Mummy." Tom's voice sounded strained when he answered. "I've been trying to reach you all morning. Have you seen the latest reports?" "Yes, darling, I've seen them." Camilla's voice was barely steady. "Tom, I need you to tell me the truth. All of it. No matter how bad it might be." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Tom finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "Mummy, I swear to you, I never intended for any of this to happen. The investments seemed legitimate at the time. My business partners assured me everything was above board. But it wasn't, was it?" Another pause. "No, it wasn't. I found out 3 months ago that some of the funds were questionable. I tried to extricate myself from the partnerships, but by then, it was too late. The money had already been moved through several accounts." Camilla closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her son's confession. 3 months ago? Tom, why didn't you tell me then? Why didn't you warn me what was coming? Because I was trying to fix it myself. I thought if I could work with the authorities, provide evidence against the real criminals, maybe we could contain the damage. I never thought it would explode like this." "And Laura? Is she involved too?" "Not directly, but Harry, her husband, made some investments based on my recommendations. He's not guilty of anything except trusting his brother-in-law's business judgment." Camilla felt sick to her stomach. She thought about her grandchildren, innocent victims of adult failures and poor decisions. "Tom, Charles has banned all of you from having any contact with the royal family. Effective immediately." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that Camilla wondered if the call had been disconnected. Finally, Tom's voice came through, broken and barely audible. "What does that mean for you, Mummy?" "It means..." Camilla's voice caught in her throat. "It means I may not be able to see you or the children anymore. Charles is asking me to choose between my family and the crown." "Then, choose us," Tom said immediately. "Leave him, Mummy. You have money of your own, properties. We can figure this out together. We're your real family." Camilla walked to the window overlooking the palace courtyard. Below, she could see the usual bustle of activity as staff prepared for the afternoon's events. In just over an hour, she would have to walk into that press room and either support her husband's decision or defy him publicly. "It's not that simple, darling. I'm not just Charles's wife anymore. I'm queen consort. I have duties, responsibilities." "To hell with duties," Tom said, his voice growing angry. "You've been by that man's side through every scandal, every crisis, every public humiliation. You stood by him when the whole world was against him after Diana's death. And this is how he repays your loyalty? By throwing your children away the moment we become inconvenient." Camilla knew Tom was right, but the situation was more complicated than he could understand. "Tom, if I defy Charles publicly, it could destroy the monarchy. The scandal would be enormous. It could bring down the government, fracture the Commonwealth. And if you support him, it destroys our family. Permanently." The truth of his words hit her like a physical blow. She sank into the chair by the window, feeling suddenly exhausted. "I don't know what to do." "Then, let me make it easier for you," Tom said, his voice becoming calmer. "Laura and I have been talking. We've decided to leave the country. Tonight, if possible. We'll take the children and disappear until this all blows over." "Tom, no. Running will only make you look more guilty. Staying will destroy you." At least if we're gone, you won't have to choose. You can tell Charles that we removed ourselves from the equation. Camilla felt tears streaming down her face. But I'll never see you again. I'll never see my grandchildren grow up. You will, Tom said firmly. Once this dies down, once Charles realizes what he's done, we'll find a way to be together again. But right now, the most important thing is protecting you. Protecting me? Tom, you're the one facing criminal charges. And you're the one caught in an impossible situation. Mummy, I love you more than anything in this world. That's why I can't let you sacrifice everything you've worked for because of my mistakes. Camilla heard voices in the corridor outside her door. Charles's private secretary was speaking in hushed tones to someone, probably about the press conference arrangements. Tom was running out. Tom, wait. Don't do anything hasty. Let me think of another way. There is no other way, Mummy. We both know that. The line went quiet for a moment. Then, Tom continued, his voice softer. Do you remember when I was little? And I used to have those terrible nightmares? You would sit by my bed and tell me that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is let go of what they love to protect it. That's not the same thing. It's exactly the same thing. I'm letting go of you to protect you. And you need to let go of us to protect the life you've built. Camilla was sobbing now, no longer caring if anyone in the corridor could hear her. I can't do this, Tom. I can't pretend that you don't exist. You won't be pretending. You'll be surviving. And survival is what our family does best. A soft knock came at her door. Your Majesty? It was her lady-in-waiting's voice. The car will be ready in 15 minutes. I have to go, Camilla whispered into the phone. I know. Mummy. Yes. I'm proud of you. No matter what you decide today, I want you to know that I'm proud to be your son, and I'm proud of the strength you've shown in an impossible situation. The call ended, leaving Camilla alone with her devastating choice. She looked at herself in the mirror across the room and barely recognized the woman staring back at her. Her makeup was ruined from crying, her hair disheveled from running her hands through it in distress. This was not the composed queen consort the public expected to see. Another knock at the door. Your Majesty, we really must begin preparations. Camilla stood up slowly and walked to her dressing table. She picked up her makeup compact and began the process of repairing the damage, transforming herself back into the public persona that duty demanded. As she worked, she thought about all the times she had done this same routine, preparing to face the world as part of the royal family. She remembered the first time Charles had brought her to a public event as his official companion, how nervous she had been about public scrutiny. He had held her hand in the car and promised that they would face everything together, that as long as they had each other, they could weather any storm. Now, here was the storm that was too big for their love to weather. Her lady-in-waiting entered quietly and began helping with the final touches of her appearance. Neither woman spoke, but Camilla could see the concern in the other woman's eyes. News traveled fast in the palace, and everyone on staff was aware that something momentous was about to happen. Your Majesty, the lady-in-waiting said softly as she adjusted Camilla's jewelry, whatever happens today, please know that you have the support and admiration of everyone who works for you. It was a small kindness, but it meant everything to Camilla in that moment. Thank you, she whispered. 10 minutes later, Camilla descended the main staircase of the palace, her heels clicking against the marble with the same authority they had that morning. But everything else was different. She was walking toward a press conference that would either cement her place in the royal hierarchy or destroy her marriage forever. Charles was waiting by the car, already dressed in his formal attire. He looked up as she approached, and, for a brief moment, his face showed relief that she had appeared at all. Camilla, he said formally as the car door was opened for them. You look composed. Do I? She asked, settling into the seat beside him. I don't feel composed. As the car pulled away from the palace toward the press room, Charles reached for her hand. She looked down at their intertwined fingers and remembered all the times those hands had comforted her, supported her, promised her a future together. Whatever happens in there, he said quietly, I want you to know that I love you. Camilla met his eyes, searching for any sign that he might change his mind, that he might choose love over duty just this once. But she saw only the resolve of a king who had made an irreversible decision. I love you too, she replied. That's what makes this so heartbreaking. The car pulled up to the media center, where dozens of cameras and reporters waited. Charles squeezed her hand once more before releasing it, and, stepping out of the car, Camilla sat for a moment longer, looking through the tinted windows at the crowd of journalists who would broadcast her decision to the world. She thought about Tom's words, about survival, about the impossible choice between love and duty. Then, she opened the car door and stepped out into the harsh glare of the camera lights, ready to face whatever came next. The press room was packed with journalists from around the world. Camera flashes popped continuously as Camilla and Charles took their places at the podium. She could feel the weight of expectation in the room, everyone waiting to see how this royal crisis would unfold. Charles approached the microphone with the confidence of a man who had spent his entire life preparing for moments like this. But, as he began to speak, Camilla felt the ground shifting beneath her feet once again, realizing that nothing could have prepared her for what was about to happen next. The press room fell silent as Charles cleared his throat and approached the microphone. The bright lights made the scene feel surreal, like a television drama rather than real life. Camilla stood slightly behind him, her hands clasped in front of her, her face a mask of royal composure despite the turmoil raging inside her. "Ladies and gentlemen of the press," Charles began, his voice carrying the weight of authority that came naturally to him. "Thank you for joining us today. The Queen Consort, and I felt it was important to address recent allegations and speculation surrounding certain members of the Parker Bowles family." Camilla's heart began to race. She could see the journalists leaning forward, sensing that they were about to witness something extraordinary. Camera flashes continued to pop like lightning, creating an almost strobing effect that made her feel dizzy. "The Crown has a sacred duty to maintain the highest standards of integrity and conduct," Charles continued. "This responsibility extends not only to the immediate royal family, but to all those who might be perceived as having connections to the monarchy." Camilla found herself holding her breath. Even though she knew what was coming, hearing the words spoken aloud made them seem more real, more final. Recent investigations by the Serious Fraud Office have raised serious questions about the business practices of certain individuals. While these are allegations that have yet to be proven in a court of law, the Crown cannot afford even the appearance of impropriety. A journalist in the front row raised her hand. "Your Majesty, are you referring specifically to Tom Parker Bowles and his investment company?" Charles nodded gravely. "Among others, yes. The investigations are ongoing, and we must allow the legal process to take its course. However, given the serious nature of these allegations, I have made the decision to completely sever all official ties between the Crown and any individual currently under investigation." The room erupted in a buzz of whispered conversations and clicking camera shutters. Camilla felt the blood draining from her face as she realized Charles was going even further than he had indicated in their private conversation. "This decision," Charles continued, raising his voice slightly to regain control of the room, "applies to all official functions, all royal residences, and all associations with royal charities and patronages. Effective immediately, these individuals are banned from any contact with members of the royal household." A reporter from a major British tabloid stood up. "Your Majesty, this would include the Queen Consort's children and grandchildren, would it not?" Charles paused, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. "It includes anyone currently under investigation, regardless of their personal relationships with members of the royal family." Camilla felt as though the floor was tilting beneath her feet. The formal, clinical way Charles was discussing her family made them sound like strangers rather than the people she loved most in the world. "Sir," another journalist called out, "what is the Queen Consort's position on this decision?" All eyes in the room turned to Camilla. She felt the weight of hundreds of stares, the expectation that she would step forward and publicly support her husband's devastating decree. Charles turned slightly and nodded toward her, his eyes carrying a clear message. This was her moment to choose. Camilla approached the microphone, her legs feeling unsteady. She looked out at the sea of faces, knowing that her words would be broadcast around the world, that they would be analyzed and dissected by royal watchers and constitutional experts. She began, then stopped. The word hung in the air like a question mark. She thought about Tom's voice on the phone, broken and resigned. She thought about her grandchildren, who would grow up not understanding why their grandmother had abandoned them. She thought about Laura, who had done nothing wrong except marry a man who had trusted his brother-in-law's business judgment. "I stand by my husband," she said finally, her voice barely audible. "Could you speak up, Your Majesty?" A journalist called from the back of the room. Camilla felt Charles's eyes boring into her. She could sense his tension, his need for her to make this moment definitive and clear. "I stand by my husband and the Crown," she repeated, louder this time. But even as she spoke the words, something inside her was screaming in protest. She felt as though she was betraying everything that had ever mattered to her, choosing institutional loyalty over maternal love. Does this mean you support the banishment of your own family members? The question came from a young reporter whose name Camilla didn't recognize. The directness of the question hit her like a slap. There was no way to answer it without either contradicting Charles or admitting to the world that she was choosing duty over love. I support the Crown's need to maintain integrity, she said carefully. But, Your Majesty, the reporter pressed on, these are your children we're talking about. How can you support a decision that separates you from your own grandchildren? Camilla felt sweat beading on her forehead despite the air conditioning in the room. The question was exactly what she had been dreading, the one that forced her to articulate the impossible choice Charles had presented her with. The monarchy, she began, then stopped again. She could feel Charles willing her to continue, to say the words that would cement this decision publicly and irrevocably. The monarchy requires sacrifices from all of us, she continued, her voice growing stronger even as her heart was breaking. Sometimes those sacrifices are personal. Sometimes they're painful. But they are necessary to preserve an institution that has served this country for over 1,000 years. She saw several journalists scribbling frantically, knowing that her words would be tomorrow's headlines around the world. Queen consort abandons family for crown. Camilla chooses duty over love. Royal mother rejects her own children. Your Majesty, another reporter called out, will you ever see your family again? The question hung in the air like a death sentence. Camilla looked at Charles, hoping for some sign that there might be a path back from this moment, some way to preserve both her marriage and her relationship with her children. But his expression remained impassive, regal, unmoved. That will depend, she said slowly, on the resolution of the ongoing investigations and the vindication of the Crown's position. It was a non-answer, but it was the best she could do without either lying outright or undermining Charles completely. She stepped back from the microphone, feeling as though she had just signed away everything that had ever brought her joy. Charles returned to the podium for closing remarks. The Crown's decision in this matter is final and non-negotiable. We ask for your understanding as we navigate this difficult period while maintaining our commitment to the highest standards of conduct and integrity. As the press conference ended and the journalists began filing out, Camilla stood frozen at Charles's side, maintaining the facade of unity while internally collapsing. She had done what he asked, had chosen the crown over her family, but the victory felt hollow and devastating. The ride back to the palace took place in complete silence. Charles stared out one window while Camilla stared out the other, both lost in their own thoughts about what had just transpired. The distance between them in the back seat of the car felt like an ocean. When they arrived back at the palace, Camilla went directly to her apartments without speaking to Charles. She needed to be alone, to process what she had just done and its implications for the rest of her life. She had barely sat down when her phone began ringing. It was Laura. Mom. Laura's voice was thick with tears. I just watched the press conference. I can't believe what I heard. Tell me it's not true. Tell me you didn't just abandon us on international television. Camilla closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her daughter's pain. Laura, darling, it's more complicated than it appeared. Is it? Because it looked pretty straightforward to me. It looked like you stood up in front of the world and chose Charles over your own children. I was trying to protect everyone involved. If I had publicly contradicted Charles, it would have made everything worse. Worse for whom? Worse for Charles? Worse for the precious crown? Because I can't imagine how it could be worse for us than it already is. Camilla could hear one of the children crying in the background, and it tore at her heart. Laura, please try to understand. Understand what? That you've abandoned us? That you care more about your title than your family? Mom, we needed you to stand up for us today, and instead you threw us away. I didn't throw you away. I'm trying to find a way through this that doesn't destroy everyone involved. Well, you failed, Laura said bluntly. Because you've destroyed us anyway. The children are asking why Granny doesn't love them anymore. Harry is talking about taking the kids and leaving the country tonight. Tom hasn't stopped crying since the press conference ended. Each word felt like a knife in Camilla's chest. Laura, please don't let them take the children away. We can find a way to fix this. How? You made your choice public, Mom. The whole world heard you choose Charles over us. How do you come back from that? It was a question Camilla couldn't answer because she honestly didn't know. She had burned bridges she wasn't sure could ever be rebuilt, damaged relationships that might never heal. I love you, she said desperately. All of you. That hasn't changed. Love isn't enough anymore, Mom. You had a chance today to prove your love, to stand by your family when we needed you most. Instead, you proved that your crown matters more to you than we do." The line went dead, leaving Camilla alone with the terrible silence of her apartments. She walked to her dressing table and looked at herself in the mirror again. The composed queen consort from the press conference stared back at her, but behind the perfect makeup and royal jewels, she could see the devastated mother and grandmother who had just lost everything that mattered to her. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Your Majesty?" It was Charles's private secretary. "The king would like to see you in his study." Camilla took a deep breath and walked downstairs to face her husband. When she entered his study, he was pouring himself a whiskey, something she rarely saw him do before evening. "That went as well as could be expected," he said without looking at her. "Did it? Because it felt like I just destroyed my family to save your reputation." Charles turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "You did what was necessary. What was right? Right for whom? Right for you? Right for the crown? Because it certainly wasn't right for my children." "Your children made their own choices, Camilla. They're responsible for the consequences of those choices. And what about our choice? What about the choice we made to spend our lives together, to support each other through everything? Was that meaningless?" Charles set down his glass and moved toward her. "Nothing about our relationship is meaningless, but it cannot supersede our duty to the crown, even if that duty destroys everything we care about. Especially then," he replied firmly. "That's what it means to be royal. That's what you agreed to when you became queen consort." Camilla stared at him, searching for any trace of the man who had courted her so passionately, who had waited decades to marry her, who had promised to love and cherish her for the rest of their lives. "I think," she said quietly, "I need some time away from the palace. Some time to think about what kind of life I want to live and what kind of person I want to be." Charles's composure cracked slightly. "Camilla, don't be dramatic. This will blow over. In a few months, no one will remember any of this." "I'll remember it," she said. "My children will remember it. And I'm not sure any of us will ever forgive it." She turned and walked toward the door, then paused. "Charles, I hope someday you realize that you didn't save the crown today. You just learned what it costs to wear it." As she left his study and walked back toward her apartments, Camilla felt something fundamental shifting inside her. The woman who had entered that press room a few hours earlier had been queen consort first and mother second. The woman walking up these stairs was no longer sure she could live with that hierarchy. 3 weeks had passed since the devastating press conference, and Buckingham Palace had settled into an uneasy quiet. The media storm had been relentless, with royal correspondents analyzing every word Camilla had spoken and constitutional experts debating the unprecedented nature of Charles's decision. But for Camilla herself, the noise from the outside world had faded into background static compared to the deafening silence where her family's voices used to be. She had tried to maintain her royal duties, appearing at charity events and state functions with the same composed demeanor the public expected. But those closest to her could see the changes. Her smile never quite reached her eyes anymore, and there was a fragility about her that hadn't been there before. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning when Camilla was reviewing her correspondence in her private sitting room. Among the usual letters from well-wishers and official invitations was an envelope that made her heart stop. It was addressed in her grandson Louis's careful 8-year-old handwriting. With trembling hands, she opened the letter. Inside was a crayon drawing of a woman in a crown standing alone in a big, empty castle. At the bottom, in uneven letters, Louis had written, "Dear Granny, why don't you love us anymore? Love, Louis. P.S. Mummy cries every day." Camilla stared at the drawing, her vision blurring with tears. The innocent question hit her harder than all the newspaper headlines and political commentary combined. How could she explain to a child that sometimes love isn't enough to overcome duty? How could she make him understand that she was trapped between two impossible choices? She tried to compose a response, but every word she wrote felt inadequate. How could she tell Louis that she loved him desperately, but couldn't see him? How could she explain that being queen meant making sacrifices that seemed cruel and senseless? The letter remained unfinished when her lady-in-waiting knocked on the door. "Your Majesty, the car is waiting to take you to the hospital opening." Camilla looked at herself in the mirror and saw a woman she barely recognized. The queen consort staring back at her looked regal and composed, but behind the perfect facade was a grandmother whose heart was slowly breaking. The hospital opening was a routine engagement, the kind of event Camilla had attended hundreds of times before. She would cut a ribbon, meet with administrators, visit a few patients, and deliver a brief speech about the importance of healthcare. It should have been straightforward and unremarkable. But, as her car pulled up to the hospital, Camilla saw something that made her blood run cold. Among the crowd of well-wishers and hospital staff, she spotted a familiar figure standing near the entrance. It was Tom's wife, Samantha, holding little Louis's hand. Camilla's first instinct was joy. For 3 weeks, she had wondered how her grandchildren were coping with the sudden disappearance of their grandmother from their lives. Seeing Louis looking healthy and dressed in his best clothes made her heart soar. But then, reality crashed back in. They weren't supposed to be there. The Royal Protection Officers would have clear instructions about the Parker Bowles family ban. If Charles found out about this encounter, there would be serious consequences. As Camilla stepped out of the car, Louis broke free from his mother's grasp and ran toward her. "Granny," he called out, his face lighting up with the pure joy that only children possess. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. Camilla wanted nothing more than to scoop him up in her arms and hold him close, to smell his little boy's scent, and feel his warm hugs that had always been her greatest source of happiness. But, before she could react, 2 Royal Protection Officers moved swiftly to intercept the child. "Sorry, young man," one of them said, not unkindly but firmly. "You can't approach Her Majesty today." Louis looked confused, his smile fading as the officers gently but insistently guided him back toward his mother. "But, that's my granny," he protested. "She always hugs me." The sound of her grandson's confusion and hurt was like a physical blow. Camilla stood frozen, her royal training warring with every maternal instinct she possessed. Protocol demanded that she continue with the official program, but her heart was screaming at her to push past the officers and embrace her grandchild. "Your Majesty," the hospital administrator approached nervously. "We're ready to begin the ceremony." Camilla looked from the administrator to Louis, who was now crying as Samantha tried to comfort him. The boy didn't understand why the grandmother who had always been his safe haven was now surrounded by men who wouldn't let him near her. "Just a moment," Camilla said to the administrator, her voice barely steady. She approached the protection officers, who stiffened slightly at her advance. Behind them, she could see Samantha watching the scene with tears in her eyes, clearly regretting the decision to bring Louis to what she had probably hoped would be a chance encounter. "Your Majesty," one of the officers said quietly, "our instructions are very clear. No contact with any members of the Parker Bowles family." "Those are my grandson's tears," Camilla said, her voice trembling with emotion. "That little boy doesn't understand politics or investigations or constitutional crises. He only knows that his grandmother seems to have stopped loving him." The officers exchanged uncomfortable glances. They were career professionals who had protected royalty for years, but this situation was unprecedented. They were being asked to prevent a grandmother from comforting her crying grandchild. "Ma'am, we understand this is difficult, but our orders come directly from His Majesty." The words hit Camilla like a slap. Charles had anticipated this possibility and had given specific instructions to prevent any contact, even accidental encounters like this one. He had planned for every contingency except the human cost of his decision. Louis continued to cry, reaching toward Camilla while Samantha tried to pull him away. "I want my granny," he sobbed. "Why won't she hug me?" Something inside Camilla finally snapped. The careful control she had maintained for 3 weeks crumbled in the face of her grandchild's tears. The role of queen consort, which had required such tremendous sacrifice, suddenly seemed meaningless compared to the simple human need to comfort a crying child. "Stand aside," she said to the officers, her voice carrying an authority they had never heard from her before. "Your Majesty, we cannot stand aside," she repeated, stepping toward Louis. "That is an order." The officers hesitated, clearly torn between their duty to follow Charles's instructions and their reluctance to physically restrain the queen consort in full view of the public and media. Camilla pushed past them and knelt down in front of Louis, gathering him into her arms. The little boy clung to her desperately, his tears soaking into her expensive coat. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," she whispered into his ear. "Granny has missed you so much." The crowd of onlookers watched in stunned silence as one of the Royal Protection Officers spoke urgently into his radio, clearly reporting the situation to his superiors. Camera phones appeared throughout the crowd, capturing the moment that would undoubtedly be front-page news by evening. Samantha approached cautiously. "Your Majesty, I'm sorry. We shouldn't have come. Tom told us not to, but Louis has been asking about you every day, and I thought." "You thought like a mother," Camilla said, still holding Louis. Don't apologize for that. She could see more protection officers arriving, their faces grim as they assessed the situation. She knew that this moment of reunion was about to end, that duty and protocol would reassert themselves and tear her away from Louis again. Listen to me, sweetheart, she said to Louis, holding his face in her hands. Granny loves you more than anything in the whole world. Sometimes grown-ups have to deal with very complicated problems, and it might seem like Granny has gone away. But I want you to remember that my love for you never goes away, even when I can't be with you. Louis nodded solemnly, not fully understanding but sensing the gravity of the moment. Will you come to my birthday party next month? The innocent question broke Camilla's heart all over again. I'll try, my darling. I'll try my very best. She knew it was a promise she probably couldn't keep, but she couldn't bring herself to crush the hope in his eyes. The lead protection officer approached them. Your Majesty, we really need to proceed with the scheduled program. And Mrs. Parker Bowles, I'm afraid I'll have to ask you and your son to leave the premises. Camilla kissed Louis's forehead one more time and slowly stood up. The physical act of letting go of him felt like tearing away a piece of her soul. Be good for Mummy, she told him. And remember what I said about Granny's love. As Samantha led Louis away, he kept looking back over his shoulder, waving at Camilla with tears still streaming down his face. She watched them disappear into the crowd, feeling as though she was watching her last connection to real happiness being severed. The hospital opening proceeded as scheduled, but Camilla moved through it like a sleepwalker. She cut the ribbon, delivered her speech, and met with patients and staff, but her mind was entirely focused on the image of Louis's confused, tear-stained face. The car ride back to the palace was silent except for the constant buzz of the protection officer's radio as reports came in about the incident. Camilla knew that Charles would be informed long before she returned, that there would be consequences for her moment of defiance. When she arrived at Buckingham Palace, she was immediately escorted to Charles's study. He was standing with his back to the door when she entered, his hands clasped behind him in a posture she recognized as indicating barely controlled anger. I assume you know why you're here, he said without turning around. Because I hugged my grandson? Because you publicly defied direct orders and created a constitutional incident. Charles finally turned to face her, and his expression was colder than she had ever seen it. The entire incident was captured on camera and uploaded to social media within minutes. The headlines are already writing themselves. Queen defies king's orders. Royal family divided. Constitutional crisis deepens. A constitutional crisis? Camilla laughed bitterly. Charles, it was a grandmother comforting a crying child. If that creates a constitutional crisis, then perhaps the Constitution needs to examine its priorities. Don't be naive, Camilla. You know exactly what this means. You've undermined my authority, contradicted royal policy, and given ammunition to every Republican who wants to see the monarchy abolished. And what would you have had me do? Walk past my crying grandson without acknowledging him? Let him think his grandmother doesn't love him anymore. Yes, Charles said bluntly. That's exactly what I would have had you do. That's what duty requires. The word duty had come to feel like a curse to Camilla. It was the justification for every cruel decision, every personal sacrifice, every moment of human connection that had to be severed in service to the crown. Then, perhaps I'm not cut out for duty, she said quietly. Charles's expression grew even more serious. What are you saying? I'm saying that I can't live like this anymore. I can't pretend that my family doesn't exist. I can't choose the crown over love every single day for the rest of my life. You're talking about abdication? The word hung in the air between them like a loaded weapon. Abdication was the nuclear option, the one thing that could destroy not just their marriage, but the entire stability of the monarchy. I'm talking about remembering who I was before I became queen consort. I'm talking about the values that used to matter to us before we became so consumed with protecting our image. Charles moved toward her, his anger giving way to something that looked like fear. Camilla, you can't be serious. Think about what you're saying. I've been thinking about it for 3 weeks. Every morning when I wake up, and remember that I may never see my grandchildren again. Every night when I go to sleep knowing that my children think I've abandoned them. I've been thinking about whether this life is worth the price we're paying for it. This isn't just about us anymore, Charles said desperately. The entire Commonwealth is watching. The government, the church, the people, they all depend on the stability of the crown. And what about the stability of our souls, Charles? What about the cost of all this to our basic humanity? He stared at her for a long moment. And She could see the war raging behind his eyes, the conflict between the man who loved her and the king who felt responsible for an entire nation. "I can't change my decision about your family," he said finally. "Too much has already been set in motion. The investigations, the public statements, the constitutional implications, it's all gone too far to reverse now." "Then, we have a problem," Camilla said simply, "because I can't live with that decision anymore." As she left his study and walked back to her apartments, Camilla felt something she hadn't experienced in weeks, a sense of clarity. She still didn't know what she was going to do, but she finally understood what was at stake. Not just her marriage or her title, but her very sense of who she was as a person. The morning of November 15th dawned gray and cold over London, matching the somber mood that had settled over Buckingham Palace in the weeks following Camilla's public encounter with her grandson. The incident had indeed become front-page news worldwide, with constitutional experts debating the implications of a queen consort publicly defying the monarch's explicit orders. Camilla had spent the night staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep as she wrestled with a decision that would change everything. In her bedside drawer lay an envelope containing a letter she had written and rewritten dozens of times. Her formal notice of intention to renounce her title as queen consort and withdraw from all royal duties. The letter represented freedom, but also the end of everything she had built with Charles over the past decades. It meant walking away from the man she loved, from a life of privilege and purpose, from an institution she had grown to respect despite its demands. But it also meant reclaiming her identity as a mother and grandmother, choosing love over duty in a way that Charles never could. She was still contemplating the letter when her lady-in-waiting knocked softly on her door. "Your Majesty, there's an urgent message from the king. He's requested your immediate presence in the blue drawing room." The blue drawing room was an odd choice for a private meeting. It was one of the palace's most formal reception rooms, typically used for state functions and important ceremonial occasions. The fact that Charles had chosen it over his private study suggested that this was not going to be an intimate conversation between husband and wife. Camilla dressed carefully, choosing a simple but elegant navy dress and her pearls, the same jewelry she had worn to her first official function as Charles's wife. If this was going to be their final official interaction, she wanted to look the part of a queen consort one last time. When she entered the blue drawing room, she found not just Charles, but also several other figures. The Archbishop of Canterbury, the Prime Minister, the private secretary to the king, and two men she didn't immediately recognize, but who had the unmistakable bearing of government security officials. "Camilla," Charles said formally, rising as she entered. "Thank you for joining us." The formality of his greeting told her everything she needed to know. This was not Charles, her husband, speaking. This was Charles the king, and she was not his wife in this moment, but a subject who had transgressed against royal protocol. "Your Majesty," she replied, matching his formal tone. "How may I be of service?" The Prime Minister, a serious woman in her 50s whom Camilla had always found rather intimidating, stepped forward with a briefcase. "Your Majesty, I'm afraid we have some rather serious matters to discuss concerning your recent actions and their implications for the crown." Camilla felt a chill run down her spine. She had expected consequences for her public defiance, but the presence of security officials and the Prime Minister suggested something far more serious than a royal reprimand. "What kind of implications?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. The Archbishop cleared his throat. "Your Majesty, your actions at the hospital opening have created what can only be described as a constitutional crisis. By publicly contradicting the king's explicit orders, you've raised questions about the unity and authority of the crown that cannot be ignored." One of the security officials opened a file and pulled out several photographs. "Ma'am, these images have been circulating on social media and have been picked up by news outlets across the Commonwealth. They show you embracing individuals who have been formally banned from royal contact by His Majesty's direct order." The photographs showed the moment she had hugged Louis, capturing the raw emotion on both their faces. In any other context, they would have been beautiful images of a grandmother's love. In the current situation, they were evidence of insubordination against the crown. Furthermore, the Prime Minister continued, "Intelligence reports suggest that this incident was not spontaneous. Phone records show that Mrs. Parker Bowles received a call the morning before the hospital opening from a number registered to your personal assistant." Camilla felt the room spinning around her. "Are you suggesting that I arranged to meet my grandson?" "We're not suggesting anything, Your Majesty," the Prime Minister replied carefully. We're stating facts based on evidence gathered by the security services. Charles finally spoke, his voice heavy with what sounded like genuine sadness. Camilla, did you arrange that meeting? She looked at him across the formal distance of the grand room and felt the last vestiges of their personal relationship crumbling away. Does it matter? Would it change anything if I had? It would change everything, the Archbishop said gravely. If you deliberately orchestrated a public meeting with banned individuals, it constitutes not just defiance, but active sabotage of royal policy. Sabotage. Camilla laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. I hugged my crying grandson. If that's sabotage, then perhaps the policy itself is the problem. The security official who had been silent until now finally spoke. Your Majesty, there's also the matter of your recent private communications. Phone calls to members of the Parker Bowles family, emails that express opposition to His Majesty's decision, text messages that could be interpreted as encouraging resistance to royal authority. Camilla realized with growing horror that they had been monitoring her private communications. The crown she had served faithfully was treating her like a security threat, surveilling her personal conversations with her own children. You've been spying on me, she said, her voice barely containing her outrage. We've been protecting the crown, Charles said quietly. When a member of the royal family begins acting contrary to established policy, certain precautions become necessary. Precautions? Charles, you've been treating me like an enemy of the state. The Prime Minister opened her briefcase and removed a formal document. Your Majesty, given the circumstances, we believe it would be in everyone's best interest if you were to temporarily step back from your royal duties while this situation is resolved. Camilla stared at the document, recognizing it as a formal suspension notice. They weren't just asking her to step back. They were removing her from her position as queen consort, stripping away her titles and responsibilities in all but name. And if I refuse? The room fell silent for a long moment. Finally, the Archbishop spoke. Your Majesty, refusal would force us to consider more permanent measures. The implication was clear. They were prepared to force her abdication if she wouldn't comply voluntarily. The institution she had served, the crown she had sacrificed her family for, was now threatening to destroy her completely. Camilla looked around the room at the faces surrounding her, constitutional experts and government officials and church leaders, all united in their determination to preserve the monarchy's authority at any cost. But the one face she searched for, the one that should have shown her support and love, remained impassive and cold. Charles, she said, abandoning all formality, please, talk to me as your wife, not as your subject. Is this really what you want? For just a moment, his facade cracked, and she saw the man she had fallen in love with, conflicted, hurting, trapped by forces larger than himself. But then, the mask of kingship reasserted itself. What I want is irrelevant, he said. What matters is the crown. Those 5 words, what matters is the crown, crystallized everything for Camilla. They represented the choice that had been destroying her slowly for months. The choice between human love and institutional loyalty, between personal happiness and public duty, between being a woman and being a symbol. Then, you've made your choice, she said quietly. And now I'll make mine. She walked to the ornate writing desk in the corner of the room and, in full view of everyone present, pulled out the letter she had been carrying. Without reading it, without hesitation, she placed it on the Prime Minister's open briefcase. My formal renunciation of all titles and duties associated with the crown, she said simply. Effective immediately. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. The Archbishop stepped forward. Your Majesty, please reconsider. There's no need for such drastic action. Isn't there? Camilla turned to face Charles one last time. You've made it clear that there's no room in your monarchy for human feeling, for family loyalty, for love that puts people before institutions. I can't live in a world where hugging my grandson is an act of treason. Charles stood frozen, his face pale. Camilla, please, think about what you're doing. I've been thinking about it for weeks. The only question was whether I had the courage to choose love over fear. Today, I found my answer. She began walking toward the door, but, as she reached it, the emotional and physical toll of the past weeks finally overwhelmed her. The stress, the sleepless nights, the constant internal warfare between duty and love, it all crashed down on her at once. The room tilted, her vision blurred, and she felt her legs giving way beneath her. She heard Charles call her name as she fell, his voice finally breaking through the royal facade to reveal genuine terror and concern. She collapsed in front of the palace guards who stood at attention by the door, their training preventing them from moving to help her even as the former queen consort, lay unconscious on the marble floor. When Camilla regained consciousness, she was lying on a sofa in a smaller adjoining room. A palace physician was taking her pulse while Charles knelt beside her, holding her hand. For a moment, the official delegation was gone, and it was just the two of them. The people they had been before crowns and duty and constitutional crises had torn them apart. "Are you all right?" Charles asked, his voice full of genuine concern. "I don't know," she replied honestly. "I don't think I've been all right for a long time." He squeezed her hand. "Camilla, we can work this out. There has to be another way." She looked into his eyes and saw the man she had loved for so many years, the one who had waited decades to marry her, who had promised they would face everything together. But she also saw the king, the institution, the weight of 1,000 years of tradition that would never allow him to choose her over duty. "The only way that works," she said softly, "is if you're willing to put love before the crown. And we both know you can't do that. I am the crown, Camilla. I can't separate myself from it." "I know," she replied sadly. "And that's why this has to end." She sat up slowly, the physician stepping back to give them privacy. "Charles, I want you to know that I don't regret loving you. I don't regret the years we had together, even the difficult ones. But I can't sacrifice my humanity to preserve your monarchy. Where will you go? To my family. To my children who think I abandoned them, and my grandchildren who don't understand why Granny disappeared from their lives. I'm going to spend whatever years I have left remembering what it feels like to be human." Charles's eyes filled with tears. "I never wanted it to end this way. I know you didn't. But this was always going to be the choice eventually. You just hoped it would never come." She stood up and walked to the door, pausing to look back at the man who had been the love of her life. "Be happy, Charles. Find a way to be happy within all of this. And maybe someday, when you're tired of choosing duty over love, you'll understand why I had to leave." As she walked through the palace corridors for the last time, Camilla felt something she hadn't experienced in months: peace. The weight of the crown she had never officially worn had been lifted from her shoulders, and, for the first time since becoming queen consort, she felt like herself again. Behind her, in the blue drawing room, Charles stood alone among the constitutional experts and government officials, staring at the letter that had ended their marriage. The crown had been preserved, royal authority had been maintained, and the monarchy would survive this crisis as it had survived so many others. But the price of that survival would haunt him for the rest of his reign, reminding him daily that sometimes the cost of keeping a crown is losing everything else that makes life worth living. Outside Buckingham Palace, Camilla Parker Bowles, no longer queen consort, no longer bound by royal protocol, hailed a taxi and gave the driver her daughter's address. She was going home to her family, to the people who loved her not for her title or her position, but simply for being herself. The fairy tale was over, but for the first time in years, real life was about to begin.